Hi, I'm David Miller, and this is the third of 7 mini-lectures on A Midsummer Night's Dream. Here's the outline of topics for this mini-lecture. I ended last time by remarking that Elizabeth isn't Shakespeare's only target in the tale of Bottom and Titania. He's also making fun of his poetic elder, Edmund Spenser. Now, Shakespeare's fairies, cute little nature spirits, are nothing like Spenser's questing knights and distressed damsels, nor is Titania anything like Spenser's Gloriana. But there's no question that Elizabeth and her prince of poets are together in the back of Shakespeare's mind. One of the entertainments Theseus rejects on the wedding night is a poem featuring the thrice three muses mourning for the death of learning, late deceased in beggary. In 1591, Spenser had followed up the major success of his own Fairy Queen with a volume of satiric poems that included the Tears of the Muses. Theseus wants none of it. In other words, Shakespeare is pretty good at having it both ways. He makes the connections between Titania, Queen Elizabeth, and Spenser's Gloriana unmistakable, but then puts plenty of distance between them. Given what happens in the forest that night, it's a good thing he did. The love affair between Bottom and Titania is one of the funniest things Shakespeare ever wrote, and it's certainly the most famous thing in A Midsummer Night's Dream. What would it have meant to an Elizabethan audience? If you identify with Oberon, it's a revenge fantasy, isn't it? That makes sense, but it misses the carnival spirit of the scenes. It makes the play more mean-spirited and therefore less funny. So again, we find ourselves wondering how he gets away with it. I think the answer is that Shakespeare has a way, and we've seen this right from the opening lines of the play, he has a way of bringing different meanings, different fantasies together in the same scenes so that no single point of view dominates. Here, for example, I said, if the audience identifies with Oberon, the subplot involving Titania is a revenge fantasy. But what if they identify with Bottom? By a strange coincidence, we actually possess a written account of a dream about the Queen that may shed some light on the question. The dreamer was a man named Simon Forman, an astrologer and a sort of medical practitioner, although his credentials were dubious, who kept a diary. One of the entries in this diary records a dream. In the dream, he accompanies the Queen, who appears as a little old lady in her underclothes. He seems to have become a trusted advisor, talking and reasoning of many matters with the ruler of the land. They encounter a tall weaver with a red beard, clearly the Bottom of this dream. Not in his right mind, he makes sexual advances toward Her Majesty, who has to be rescued by the dreamer. Standard dream analysis would tell us that this weaver is not only the dreamer's opposite, but also another aspect of himself, since he too wants to lie with the Queen rather than simply protect her. Sure enough, as they go on, now passing through a dirty lane, an appropriate setting for dirty thoughts, the dreamer lifts her white smock from behind and makes a joke about wanting to get the Queen pregnant. She responds, becoming more and more affectionate. "Methought she began to love me," writes Forman. "Methought she would have kissed me." Sound familiar? Well, if you've gotten to the end of Act 4, it should. "Methought I was, and methought I had." The similarities between Forman's dream and Bottom's are pretty striking. There are conflicting motives in the dream. The ambition to be close to Elizabeth as a trusted counselor, the desire to defend her against men with red beards, but also the desire to possess her sexually, little old lady or not. This is a much more complicated and ambivalent set of desires than mere revenge, isn't it? Louis Montrose, the scholar who made this connection, doesn't propose that Shakespeare had read Forman's diary. He proposes instead that Shakespeare has really good antennae, and that he picked up on cultural fantasies that were circulating widely. And so the play gratifies a whole range of conflicting feelings that male viewers in Shakespeare's audience may have had toward powerful female figures. So much for the Queen and her male subjects. What does the play offer to women and children? Well, let's start with children. Powerful female figures are pretty important to them. We call these powerful women mothers. There aren't any actual mothers in Shakespeare's play. The mother of the Indian child died in childbirth. But there are children everywhere. Some of them are symbolic children like the fairies and the mechanicals, but some are quite literal. The first child we meet in the play is Hermia, who comes on stage in the opening scene already in full rebellion against her father's authority and threatened with death for her insubordination. Theseus states quite succinctly the rationale for that authority. To you, your father should be as a god. This is not a point of view with which the play asks us to sympathize, but it is one of the dogmas of conservative Elizabethan ideology. It's pretty much undermined in this scene by the Duke's bizarre description of how children are created. There's no mother required. The father just prints his image in the child's flesh, as if that flesh were no different than the heated wax he uses to seal a letter. This view of fatherhood anticipates the custody battle between Oberon and Titania over the Indian child. Theseus assumes that children belong exclusively to the father. Titania withholds this little boy from the father figure Oberon, and she does so explicitly out of allegiance to the boy's mother. She remembers his mother in a passage of striking loveliness. I'm just going to read this one aloud. The fairyland buys not the child of me. His mother was a votress of my order, and in the spiced Indian air by night full often hath she gossiped by my side, and sat with me on Neptune's yellow sands, marking the embarked traders on the flood, when we have laughed to see the sails conceive and grow big-bellied with the wanton wind, which she, with pretty and with swimming gait following, her womb then rich with my young squire, would imitate and sail upon the land to fetch me trifles and return again, as from a voyage rich with merchandise. But she, being mortal, of that boy did die, and for her sake do I rear up her boy, and for her sake I will not part with him. Notice how these lines create the image of a purely feminine space, filled with intimacy, affection, laughter, playfulness, poetic fantasy, and the fertility of the womb. If the armed resistance of the Amazon offers one image of female solidarity, this passage offers a very different image, one that is beguiling rather than threatening. It can afford to be, since there are no males present to interfere. Except Oberon. Like the Amazonian bow new bent in heaven, this feminine space is safely distanced from the present action of the play. The danger it presents to male supremacy is seen in the resistance these memories inspire in Titania. And here again, we find the sort of ambivalence Shakespeare is able to capture, for while Titania will undergo a comic humiliation and will give the child up to Oberon, the fairy domain itself preserves some of this sense of intimacy, since Titania's entourage are all so childlike. Another image of intimacy between women appears in the ancient love of Helena and Hermia. It, too, is recollected from a distance, stylized and idealized in images of childhood innocence that hasn't survived the intrusion of sexualized males at puberty. I won't read this whole thing aloud now, but notice at the end, and will you rent our ancient love asunder to join with men in scorning your poor friend? For a patriarchal society, Childhood is good when it's innocent. The child figure must be harmless, passive, and unambiguously the property of the father. We see one version of this, as I suggested earlier, in the mechanicals. They are foolish, innocent, and eager to please. They represent the bottom, so to speak, of the social hierarchy, and in them it is unthreatening to the ruler, and therefore is deserving of his generous indulgence. In his eyes, their acting talents, or rather their lack of talent, matters less than their eagerness to please. The fairies offer another image of childhood as utterly cute and charming because completely unthreatening. The only real mischief maker is Puck, who remains firmly under the thumb of Oberon. Bottom himself, of course, is the biggest baby of all. It's no accident that Oberon's strategy is to substitute Bottom for the Indian child as the object of Titania's affections. All Bottom wants is to be coddled, to be fed, to have his ears scratched, and to be sung to sleep. The sexual implications of his fling with Titania could get pretty disturbing, but Shakespeare, who was always getting away with something, gets away with this by infantilizing his donkey boy, to the point that we can't really be sure whether Titania seduces him or just gives him some hugs and caresses, a bottle of hay, and a nice lullaby. It's really kind of sweet, you know? By now it should be pretty clear that there are lots and lots of fantasies circulating through the language and action of Shakespeare's play. There are fantasies of rebellion and submission, sexual passion, and maybe even bestiality, but also fantasies of purity, innocence, and gratified desire. These fantasies offer very different points of identification and attachment for a wide range of viewers. They are woven with the threads that stitch ideologies of state power to forms of life within the family. But here, the threads get loosened and rewoven. The result is what Bottom calls a vision most rare. Having risked the attempt to say a few things about this dream, I am clearly, at least by Bottom's standards, nothing but a patched fool. That's all right. I'll play the fool for Bottom if it helps you understand the play a bit better, and I hope it does. Next time, how about a handy overview of the characters and settings in the play? You know, I used to start with such an overview, but you need time to read all 5 acts before that's really useful, so I've put it off until the second week.